Hello, and welcome to the AskJP podcast, where we talk about the pertinent issues of the day. Today, I'm really excited to have Mark Raymond Jr. with the Split Second Foundation. We're going to talk about the variety of different things going on in the city with those in the differently abled community, talk about ADA compliance, and just a lot of stuff in that area. And before we really get into it, I kind of want Mark to give us an overview of who he is and his role on RTA and his role with Split Second and all the great stuff they do. So, Mark, hand it off to you.
Thanks, JP, and thanks for having me on the show. This is going to be fun. So, to all of you who don't know me, my name is Mark Raymond Jr. I am the CEO and founder of the Split Second Foundation. Our organization is committed to breaking barriers for people with disabilities, and we recently opened the first inclusive fitness facility in Louisiana for people with intentional exercise recovery programs for people who have experienced a stroke, paralysis, amputation, or another neurological condition. So we've been doing a lot of work in the community, advocating for more resources. I have a very personal experience of dealing with a disability. In July of 2016, I suffered a spinal cord injury from a tragic accident, which left me paralyzed from the neck down. And JP, when I was discharged from inpatient therapy, it was the weight was just heavy on us. I mean, it was all on me and my family to navigate all of the resources or lack thereof in society. And it was very isolating because it was just so hard to really get connected with people, and the turnaround times, there was always a wait, or people weren't available. And it was very trying, especially for someone who's dealing with so much grief and guilt behind an accident. And that's really what fueled me to create this organization, to start to build resources for people so that when they walk out of inpatient therapy, they can turn to us and our experience and help us, and we help them, walk them through what life looks like, to make their recovery process more efficient. Through that journey, I think I've been recognized as someone who is not afraid to speak up for the ADA community and differently abled community. Mayor Cantrell appointed me to the RTA board shortly after she was sworn in to be the mayor of New Orleans. About 5 months after that, the Chairman Daniels, Flozell Daniels, asked that I be the finance chair and the vice chair of the RTA. And I really went there, again, with the personal experience of how poorly we were servicing members in the community on the paratransit side. There were days before I was a commissioner and I would use the service, it would literally take me 25 minutes to call and schedule a ride. I couldn't schedule a trip any other way, right? There was no email in, no website access. It was phone call, phone bank only. And you would be sitting on hold for quite a while sometimes, trying to get through to an operator just to schedule your trips, right? And then on the backside, if they're late and it makes you late to a doctor's appointment, it's not like the doctor's going to have some sympathy for you because the public transportation system was slow. So there were a lot of improvements that needed to be made from that system. And I started to advocate for that immediately when I got there. And more recently, I've been appointed to the Governor's Advisory Council on Disability Affairs, in which we advise the governor and the legislature on bills that have anything to do with the ADA community or advancing issues related to disabilities. So that's been another just prideful moment, being able to provide advice and advocate for members of the community from that platform. I was also named the co-chair of the Transportation Committee. I think it was really there was a lot of synergy between the work that I do here for RTA and that work in advancing more regional transportation options and really pushing the conversation about how we better connect parishes and better service people throughout the state with disabilities. So that's my 5-minute introduction.
No, I mean, it's great. I mean, honestly, just from the introduction, I think it's so interesting People always have a hard time gaining perspective from other people with different experiences. And think about that for a second in my listening, review, and audience. When you decide you want to go somewhere, you get in your car, you walk outside and go. From Mark's perspective and from the people he represents in that community who are our citizens, our brothers, our sisters, our friends, before Mark got on RTA, you could not spontaneously do anything. You had to plan out a half an hour to an hour. If you want to go to McDonald's, you got to plan out a half an hour to an hour in advance.
Exactly.
I mean, that's rough. I mean, think about that. Like when you think about, oh, I don't know how many told people I got to go to Walmart. If you are in the ADA community with the way RTA was running, it was you better plan out that toilet paper run out. You better notice beforehand because it's going to be a half an hour to an hour to get in the vehicle to go to get the toilet paper.
Oh man, I mean, worse than that, it would be a half an hour, 20 minutes to schedule the trip. That's for tomorrow, right?
Damn. I mean, that's wild when you think about it. Because that's why I stopped on that. Because like when people are listening, I find that part of what a service I do for people just in doing something like this is giving a different perspective. Like people always think my experience is the typical experience, and it's so impressive to share with people that listen. Like you think you're inconvenienced when the bus is late. When the bus is late 10 minutes, you're inconvenienced. What happens if you schedule a ride and the ride, because there's so few vehicles available, that ride just can't come that day? Right. I mean, that changes your whole day. That changes your whole trajectory for that week, especially if you had to schedule it a day ahead, plan your whole day around it, and a vehicle breaks down or something. That's different than a bus. Another bus can go in service. We have lots of those, but we'll get into that and some other stuff. But like, it's just thank you, Mark, for leading off with that because it already starts conversation. You know what I mean? Like, it already makes me. I'm already thinking of questions, and I've known Mark for a long time. I know usually a lot of these conversations are very scripted. This is not scripted at all. Mark knows what gave it to us. It's not. You and I know each other so well. We're going to kind of just go where the conversation takes us. So the first thing I want to talk about, obviously, was RTA. Because obviously, when you joined the organization, it did not have a great reputation when it came to being accessible to the ADA, differently able community. And just in my time, from the outside looking in, with your service on that board, it has gotten significantly better. Can you tell us, like, where things have gone in a good way and what things you still see have to still be done?
Oh God, we've made tremendous progress, and not just from a paratransit angle, but agency-wide. And I think we approached that from a very different viewpoint when we got this new board. The mayor had the insight to put 3 new members on that were very transit-oriented, and eventually 4, right? With the appointment of Commissioner Arthur Walton and Laura Bryan, both of which work in the mayor's office, and myself and Fred Neal, who's another huge transit advocate. And initially, our sole objective was to be the voice of the people, right? We were hearing so many complaints, not just from the paratransit angle, but buses not running on schedule, the app not working the right way, new ferry boats not in the water. We had interagency issues with personnel, and it just, the culture at the agency was not the best. We took the stance as a board that we wanted the RTA to be one of the best run organizations in the city and state, and one of the organizations that people would want to go work for, right? Not looking at it as the bad apple in the city. And walking through that, it took us a couple of years to really implement some of the changes that people have been pushing for, like getting away from the delegated management structure in which TransDev North America was basically managing, administering, and operating our transit system, and give that accountability back to the people and the public. So making the organization completely public was a huge start. And that was a 2-year process, really 3. And through that process, really um, making equity the main focal point, right? How do we meet people where they are? How do we change the perception of an agency? And how do we drive accessibility, right? For a historically inaccessible city and an agency who, quite frankly, at times treated paratransit and the ADA community like the redheaded stepchild that we really don't care about. And so bringing that new energy and so many passionate leaders to the table and really forcing solutions to some of these problems drove a lot of the changes that people see today. I mean, new ferries on the river, new buses around the city, new paratransit vehicles coming, fleet replacement plans. Um, the app is seeming to work better. We're using technology better. We're hearing better stories from riders. We aren't hearing as many complaints from the public. Um,
And Mark, that's so interesting because, as you know, because you're from here like I'm from here, it used to be pre-Katrina, the bus service was reliable enough that we didn't even have yellow school buses. Kids just took RTA to school. And it got so dysfunctional post Katrina that though many people, especially older people like our parents, our grandparents, are like, why the hell aren't the kids riding the city bus anymore? Then after about a little while, they were like, well, now we know where they're not riding the city bus because you can't guarantee you're going to get to school. I'm
right.
beginning to hear the conversation kind of return back to, for a lot of these high schools and a lot of these areas where, or junior highs where kids are catching the bus again, that RTA's reached a level of reliability where people are wanting to have the conversation again about maybe instead of having ridiculously expensive bus service that is very inconvenient. I mean, I don't know how many of y'all have kids out there, but who are listening or watching, but like the biggest complaint you got from parents about the school bus services is that because a bus has to go around the entire city to get kids to go to one school, those buses start rolling at 5:30, 6 a.m.
Yeah.
So a kid might get picked up at 6 a.m. and may not get to school till 8 o'clock. Whereas pre-Katrina, actually a little before that because the bus service was a little rougher before Katrina too, but it used to be at a level of reliability where your kid could know that bus ride is 45 minutes. I get to the bus stop 7:15. I get to school. And they've done so much with RTA right now to get it back to a level of credibility. I'm talking to parents like myself who are talking to each other going, wait a second, maybe we shouldn't be using the yellow buses anymore because the RTA has gotten a level of reliability. My teenager would do well with an extra hour, hour and a half of sleep and catch the RTA bus. And I mean, that's a huge deal because I hadn't heard that conversation resurge on a level where people were taking it credibly till real recently. And that's a real testament to what the level of reliability that you guys and the mayor have brought back to RTA. I mean, it's not where y'all want it to be, but it is light years away of where it was post Katrina.
I'll say, man, there are a lot of changes in cities that require movement from the bottom up. This was a situation that required energy from the top down. And I just got to thank the mayor for having the insight, again, for bringing on this board. I really want to give a lot of the credit to Alex Wiggins, our new CEO, and his team. We charged them with really taking the RTA narrative and perception back into our own hands and telling our own story. And part of that story had to center around trust, reliability, and safety, right? Because those were the main concerns we were hearing from parents who would like to put their kids back on these buses, was that they can't trust the service, it's not reliable, and they don't feel like it's safe, right? And what we've managed to do is really change that story. And now we're even starting to explore products like the Jazzy Pass and giving it to students and kids at a much more reasonable cost, so they could use all modes of transportation with just this one pass, right? You get a monthly pass, you can go wherever you need to go, to camp, to work, and having that, again, that trust that the service is going to be there, the app is working and it's right. When it tells me a bus is here, it's actually there, right? And that it's safe. Safety has been a huge concern for the city, especially in this the last 15 months with COVID and a lot of people losing their jobs. And we've really started to explore additional options to make people, not just the riders, but also our operators feel safer on the vehicles, like installing emergency buttons that would signal a series of lights to go off and a loud alarm sound, and send a message to dispatch that we have a situation, send an RTA security professional to this location immediately, right? So we have our own public safety infrastructure built in. I think as you continue to see the RTA story written, you'll see some of those progressive ideas implemented. One of the solutions that we've been hearing from some members of the public was put a police officer on every bus. And JP, you and I both know that that's not feasible nor
No,
affordable.
I mean, with as depleted as our police force currently is, if you were to put a police officer on every bus, it would so dramatically impact their response time in neighborhoods and in districts. Plus, the reality is that, and I mean, to be honest, I I don't know if y'all have great PR or if the rest of the city has crap PR, but I would argue that if you look at just when you follow the crime stats, the amount of crime that happens in public transit is actually remarkably low for a city of our size. I mean, honestly, depending on what neighborhood you live in, you might be safer catching a bus going to work than driving your car. And I think it's almost like when you look at major cities like like New York, like San Francisco, that have serious public transit, they do have a robust, I guess, sort of like, you know, have RTA security professionals, but there's like an unspoken rule with people who interact with public transit that's kind of almost a safe space for getting rolled up on. You know what I mean? It's like no one wants that to be
I hate to say it,
everybody's grandma is riding a bus. You don't know when your grandma's going to be on a bus or when someone's grandma's going to be on a bus, so it's like that's just kind of a no-fly zone. But I mean, I will tell you that in my experience with public transit across the country, that it used to be very embarrassing to tell people about New Orleans and the RTA, but just from people who visit the city who are used to public transit, that narrative has changed significantly. Well, let's why don't we pivot real quickly? Give me your top thing that y'all haven't done yet that you really want to see happen in the next couple of years.
top thing we haven't done, I would say, is God, we've done so much. Now getting into on-demand transit and what
Right.
that looks like, right? Being able to provide a true on-demand service. I pop open my app, request a trip, and an RTA vehicle comes and brings me from point A to point B. We're really exploring what those options look like. A lot of agencies across the country are, and we're actually going to pilot a program in New Orleans East using a company called Route Match, which is actually owned by Uber now, to provide this on-demand experience. So I'm really excited what the results from that will look like. Um, I'll say from an infrastructure perspective, it's definitely a downtown bus transit hub, as well as one in Algiers and New Orleans East, really using transit-oriented development as a driver for economic development in some of these underserved communities. People constantly talk about the perception, particularly of New Orleans East and the lack of investment. We strongly feel like transit-oriented development is a solution to some of those issues and will catalyze more economic development. I think beyond that, it's again exploring rail options to connect parishes, specifically Orleans to Baton Rouge. Um, that would give people so many more opportunities for jobs along the river. It would diversify our economy. It would get people to LSU games on a Saturday and people from Baton Rouge to a Saints game on Sunday. Let's highlight that because that's what people really care about, right?
Well,
I,
I think it's so important when you're talking about economic development in New Orleans East in particular, and also Algiers. In New Orleans East, one of the big issues I know that is being explored, is something that I've looked into, and I know other people out there who are trying to make things happen are looking into, is there is this chicken and the egg argument between how do we push economic development in very specific areas and access to transportation to do so. And I say that insofar as that we haven't had, and there's been conversations, I've talked to a lot of people out there about doing economic overlays, kind of directing economic development in specific areas where there's population hubs. And really, when you start to have those conversations while talking about transportation options, the two dovetail nicely together, because you want to make sure that the transportation hub, where people from around the east are trying to get to a singular area, and that hub could be a connector to go downtown or go wherever, but that also could just be a hub of, this is where all of your retail, all of your available stuff that you want to go to, that's going to be in the east. The two need to be married together. You need to have, this is where we're going to put our emphasis, all of our incentives, all of our activity for economic development. And even as you're selling that to companies, to retail, to big box, to restaurants, as you're selling them on that, you're saying, and by the way, we're so committed to this, this is going to be a transit hub. So I'm telling you, not just you're going to get the traffic from the guy driving to come to your place. This is a central transit hub where everybody riding the bus is going to stop here before they go somewhere else, which also guarantees foot traffic. But I mean, people often forget that, like, transportation accessibility and economic development go hand in glove. I mean, the two things have to go together. And to that point, where in the parts of the city where we have ridiculous amounts of economic options, I mean, look at all of the tremendous development along the Carrollton corridor,
Yes.
at the foot of Carrollton by City Park.
Yeah.
That would not be possible without the bus and the streetcar. It would
Perfect.
not be possible. The two things go hand in hand. And it's the same reason why when you see that kind of development, you don't see it mirrored necessarily in other parts of the city where it's very similar, when they don't have the same transportation options. So, I mean, I think that's great. I want to go to our next topic, because you kind of led into it when you talked about the new app that y'all are looking at for New Orleans in particular. Let's talk about TNCs, obviously, because as everyone knows, the cab industry is not what it once was. It's a polite way of putting it. And that Uber and Lyft have sort of driven the market towards the TNC on-demand ride model. And you and I have had off-air conversations about, there are simply not enough options in that sphere for those people who have ADA needs, are differently abled, or just need that access. And the complaint you often get from those platforms is, well, we'll push that, we'll use it, but we can't create those vehicles that will provide that accessibility. And give me some of your ideas on what you think. Obviously, I have some ideas on what I think, but, like, this is an area where if we're going to move to a true on-demand transit option, where we're going to say we're going to move away from cabs, we're going to move away from limos and whatever else, and we're going to go to a on-demand society, how do we make sure that on-demand is accessible for everybody?
That's a great question. And, I always think about, there's two different transit experiences in New Orleans, right? You have the experience of a citizen, and then you have the experience that a tourist gets. The citizen can use the paratransit service, RTA, blah, blah, blah. But a tourist flying in, they don't have all of that infrastructure already laid out for them. So currently, with TNCs like Uber and Lyft not offering a wheelchair accessible vehicle option, completely limits the people that we can serve as tourists, right? We don't incentivize or encourage travelers, in wheelchairs, or promote the accessibility of the city. It hasn't been on the forefront of the conversation, right? Part of that is because we haven't, as a municipality, regulated these TNCs or required them to do any type of business with maybe a Mel's transportation, so that there is, wheelchair accessible vehicle options like there are in other municipalities such as Houston and Washington, D.C., Boston. So that's the solution. But from a much bigger level, honestly, when I traveling for me is the most difficult thing, and it requires the most amount of planning. I got to call the airport, make sure they know about my needs, and to get the right seat, make sure they can store the chair right. Because at different size planes, that's an issue, right? Get to my destination, I can't just roll the Avis and say, "Hey, I need a wheelchair accessible vehicle." They don't have that, right? They don't have minivans with ramps just on demand. They've never been regulated to do that. Similarly with TNCs, some cities and municipalities still don't regulate, the availability of these vehicles for people visiting their city like me, right? So I have to do so much homework on the front end. I feel like a big solution to both of those issues would be an amendment to the ADA, requiring rental car companies and TNCs to have wheelchair accessible vehicles. So regulating it and incentivizing small business owners to purchase these vehicles so that we can get them in service and better move people, right? This is about mobility.
And Mark and I had already talked previously, and I think it's important to note the cost of converting a vehicle to a accessible vehicle could be anywhere from 15 to 20, depending on the vehicle. If you get real fancy, it could be $25,000-$30,000. And really, the pushback you get, and I know this from some of my legislative experience having these conversations, it's back to that chicken and the egg argument. Well, if they had those vehicles, they'd be top of our list to do. But the average small business owner, TNCs, Uber, Lyft, they're driven by individuals in their own vehicles. It's not economically feasible for someone who's driving for Uber or for Lyft typically to convert a vehicle to have an ADA accessible vehicle. The cost in the investment for most people, they do these type of gig economy jobs because the buy-in's very low. You can pop in, you can pop out. And really the only solution as I see it is this twofold. One, you're going to have to contract with groups like MEL to say, we as a city, we're going to have to determine how many certificates of need we need to put out there for TNCs that are handicap accessible, that are accessible for ADA community, for different label community. And you're almost going to have to create the market for it. You're going to have to create the market, establish the regulations for it, make sure there are enough but not too many so that they can actually make money to survive, and really investigate how the city's going to get involved in an aggressive way on the front end to fund it. Because the reality is that an organization, that there simply isn't the financing available. Let's say if you're somebody who used to own a cab company or a limo service and you want to convert to an ADA fleet, you're talking about 15 to 30 grand per vehicle potentially to make them accessible. And the reality is, like Mark said, it's not simply enough to say we just want some vehicles that are ADA accessible. It's not fair to somebody, whether they're local or whether they're a tourist, that the person who's a typical person gets in a nice, heavily regulated car that's got air conditioning, that's so many years old, that it's a very specific experience. And then we go to that kind of separate but equal model where it's like any accessible car meets the criteria, and you have somebody roll up in a decommissioned van from like a mental health hospital that's like 30 years old with no air conditioning, but goes, it's got a ramp, so get in my car. Right. You're going to have to set a standard, and then you're going to have to incentivize or subsidize those vehicles becoming accessible vehicles. And part of that's going to have to be doing some kind of language where we're going to have to make the TNC companies bear some of the burden of doing that and saying, listen, if we're going to allow you to kind of essentially be the almost monolithic taxi industry in the city, part of accessibility is we have to work with you, whether it's in the model of the TNCs and how they pay or charge themselves, or the companies themselves, and say, listen, you have to subsidize us getting to 100 ADA vehicles. As a number. I'm throwing it out there. Obviously, Mark, RTA will be able to generate kind of what that number looks like from this usership, but like 100, 200, however many vehicles they're going to be, and say, it's on you to work with the city with teeth to help us get to 100 vehicles in 6 months. And then when those companies or those individuals have those vehicles, it's going to be on you to help us market, not just locally, but nationally, that these vehicles are available. Because, like you said, as a city, we always encourage people to visit us. And I know you and I have talked previously about how if you have to plan out, like you said, to your own experience, to plan a trip, having advertised accessible TNC vehicles for people in the ADA community, that's a selling point. When you're trying to decide between I want to go to New Orleans or Nashville or wherever, the city that can accommodate you is the city where you want to be. So all this stuff pays for itself, but it's going to require some aggressive action on the front end to do it. And I mean, it's kind of incumbent upon us. I mean, obviously, Mark's in it to win it. So whatever happens, Mark going to be in the thick of it, making it happen. But it's incumbent upon our politicians, our leaders. I'm sure the mayor will be on top of this as well. But like, you have to get in there and say, no, we're going to make you do this. Because at the end of the day, companies are about making a profit. And in the short, long term, ADA compliance is not a profit-driven model for them. They're not going to generate enough money off these cars to make the money themselves. It's going to have to be on regulation, like you said.
Yeah. And I think, too, from that holistic perspective of how we drive the market, I mean, we have to leverage the New Orleans and tourism marketing community to make sure that we are marketing accessibility in the city and how much better we are, right? Because we do have a historical label of being historically inaccessible, right?
You're 1,000%. I mean, it's people forget sometimes when you're a city and you're as old as we are, that sort of cuts both ways. Because when I talk to my friends in the ADA community, they're like, I don't want to go to Philadelphia. I don't want to go to Boston. All them streets are old. All those buildings are old. And in every jurisdiction, when you reach a certain age, it's like ADA compliance. Don't worry about that. It's you old. You don't have to do any of that. And it's like, I mean, that's nice for preservationists, but it's kind of awful for people that don't have any access. And I mean, we're going to have to aggressively change that perception. But that's a good lead into the next topic. Let's talk about infrastructure. Because obviously, like, we are a city of broken streets and broken sidewalks and broken everything. In your opinion, Mark, how are we doing with all the work we've done across the city on infrastructure and construction to meet the needs of the ADA community?
Every day gets better. You know, you drive. 2 years ago, we were complaining, you know, about all these busted streets. Now we're complaining that every street in the city is under construction, right? Which is like, okay, great, we're making progress. But unfortunately, that construction makes things even more inaccessible. For example, my street right now, outside of my front door, is ripped up. Sidewalk busted up too. So I've had to have conversations to get them to understand how I need to get to and from, you know, an RTA vehicle to pick me up or to the bus stop. So, you know, getting them to see, we've got someone with an accessibility need. That means I need to lay out plywood all the way down the end of this block so he can get there and make sure he doesn't fall over because we got dirt mounds in different places, right? So I'm constantly having to advocate for myself as well as other people, and you know, and ADA as a whole, through this process. But to say that we have come so far, unfortunately, we still do have so far to go. And you hit the nail on the head with the historical city designation. It always brings up an interesting argument to me over what is more important, historical significance or functionality, right? You know, especially from a city's perspective. I used to complain about the St. Charles streetcar because there was no ADA streetcars, right? And because they were using this historical designation on the streetcars as an argument to not do it, and that didn't make any sense. Like, how are we going to use history as the argument to discriminate?
Right.
You know, like in 2020, like how can we possibly be doing that when most of the conversations today are history shows us we need a
history shows us we've been doing it the complete wrong way. We need inclusion, and I mean, you're 100% right. I mean, that argument would be like saying that we don't need to modify streetcars for the ADA community would be like saying, "Hey, we got two water fountains out front. One says colored, one says white. That's just the way it's been. I mean, historically, the building's 300 years old. Hey, you people go drink out the white one." You mean like you can't use that logic anymore. It's if it was wrong, you got to correct it. That's it. Don't get the spick
I got these two plaques on the wall. One says colored, one says white. It's historical. We can't change it.
We can't change it. Like what? Like that? What? I mean, for those of you who can't see because you're listening to like the like the comments of the ears version of my show, my background's actually Mark on the streetcar with the lift that they put on those, which is amazing. I mean, it's amazing because this city literally markets the streetcars as the central transit experience. And until you got on RTA, a whole segment of the population could not experience the landmark transit vehicle of New Orleans that's on every single advertisement we have.
And let me tell you, it's still not good enough to me. Like I was so disheartened when I heard the two gentlemen that filed the initial suit had passed because of a sedentary lifestyle. So they died before they could see this come to fruition. Then to find out we were only doing 3 of the cars and we were only outfitting 12 out of the 102 stops to be accessible stops. So it's still a huge inequity. We're still discriminating. Right, I mean, people in wheelchairs have to get off miles in between stops at some points, and it's because of the lay of the St. Charles Avenue and the width of some of the neutral ground areas where they have regular stops for able-bodied people. It's not wide enough to facilitate the lift dropping down and having enough running room for someone to drive off of it without driving into the street. So, you know, these are more issues that require more intentional solutions.
Well, I'm 100% sure that it'll be resolved because you're not going to rest until we have it resolved because that's so disheartening. I mean, I'll tell you, my infrastructure experience with ADA, you'll find this, you will appreciate this. The public may not know this. So there was years after Katrina where at the Civil District Court, there are 3 elevators, and only 1 elevator worked. This was the same way it was probably through Nagin, through half of Mitch. And it was so obnoxious because the city is responsible for maintaining the elevators. They just didn't care. There was 1 elevator that worked. What every lawyer recognized, because we're all lawyers, if that 1 elevator broke down, Mark, they shut down the court because it violated ADA. So the 1 elevator would occasionally break down. You would inevitably see a security guard carrying down someone down the stairs who's differently able, so else carrying their wheelchair, or helping someone down with their crutches or whatever. And that's just the way it was. I had to pass a law at the state level that said if you have elevators in a public building, more than half have to be operable. I had to pass a law. And what happened was, it was funny because the rest of the state was like, I mean, our elevators work. What's the problem? And I was like, I'm sorry, but our elevators don't. So I have to actually pass a law because if I don't pass a law, I can't guarantee that when I'm not here anymore, they're going to do it. So I passed the law, and within 2 months of me passing the law, the city fixed the second elevator. So if you go to CDC now, there's always 2 elevators working because when we passed the law as a fine per day for having only 1 elevator working. But that is the kind of asinine, real government sometimes is so asinine and so cheap that they don't think for a second how saving a buck or cutting a corner can be devastating to somebody in that community. Because let me tell you, if you're a plaintiff, let's say that you are disabled because you were in a car wreck like you were, Mark, and you are finally got your day in court to go to trial against the driver that hit you or something, okay?
Oh, I was a boat accident. Sorry.
So, okay, in a car accident. So car accident, okay. Then you finally get a jury impaneled. You're ready to go. Elevator stops working. It's like, not only are you dealing with the trauma and everything else of what happened, now you have to get carried out of the courthouse. They have to reset your trial. Depending on what the jury pool looks like or the judge's schedule, you may be coming back months later to retry a case, all because the city didn't give enough of a crap at the time to make sure at least 2 elevators were working. But like, when you talk about infrastructure, that's what I mean why it's so valuable to have people like you in public service, Mark, who give perspective. Because a person who's not in the ADA community, who has no contact with anybody in the ADA community, I promise you it doesn't occur to them. It does not occur to them that, oh, 1 elevator, that's inconvenient to me, but I can take the stairs. If
Right.
some people can't take the stairs. Like, there's a reason why these laws are on the books. And I remember when I was passing that bill, Mark, I had all these people show up from these historic courthouses saying, well, we're a historic courthouse. And I was like, I don't care. I don't care if your courthouse is historic. Like, if you only got 1 elevator, I care nothing about that. But if you got 3 elevators, this applies to you. 2 got to work. Like, that's just the way it is. But I'm so glad to hear things are getting better. I had not even comprehended till you said it how massive construction could negatively impact someone trying to get out their house. Because when the reality is like, when I see these streets torn up, everybody just goes across their lawn. And it's like, some people can't go across their lawn. It's not an option. I mean, it's serious.
Man, it happened to me one night coming home. The driver actually couldn't get down my street. So they had to let me out at the end of the block. I got stuck in the dirt at 10:30 at night.
Oh, shit.
You know? Super inconvenient.
Super.
Right?
I mean, that's super inconvenient. 10:30 at night? Oh, my God. That's just... Okay, let's hit our last topic, which I think is important because we're starting hurricane season.
Yes.
Obviously, for a lot of people in our community who don't have their own vehicles or have access, everyone relies upon the city's public transit to provide emergency evacuations in the case of a hurricane. And this season looks like it may not be the most active, but it'll be close. Could be the second or third most active season in the last 2 or 3 years. Can you kind of educate people on what their options are should a hurricane come and for evacuation with public transit?
Absolutely. And just to let everyone know, we hosted our ADA hurricane emergency preparedness meeting last week with the Department of Homeland Security, with the Department of Health, NOPD, and basically there are different pickup points throughout the city that members of the ADA community can wait by, and we will do round the clock pickups from these points. You can find out all of that information at norta.com or go into the building and request one of the brochures on emergency preparedness. And for the paratransit community, of course, those vehicles will still be doing the on-demand service pickup to bring people to either shelters in the city. I think the main location we do is the Superdome or Convention Center. And if the hurricane is bad enough, we will transport people to Baton Rouge. But letting people know that they have these public safety options. Also, we're having the same conversation at the state level on what those transportation options look like throughout other parishes. But yeah, it's super important that people know these options exist. And if anybody has any questions, you can reach out to me personally, of course.
Yeah. I mean, I think there used to be that old thing that when Mitch was mayor, it was like, have a plan. I think for everybody, I think it's really important as we go into hurricane season, and it's kind of with the PTSD of living in the southeastern Louisiana and in New Orleans post everything. You have to have a plan. And I mean, I think it's really important as you listen here today to this podcast, if you're in the ADA community or if you have a loved one that's in it, it's really important before we get into the meat of hurricane season to have a plan, to know all the options. And more importantly, it's not a bad idea to always kick the tires. And if you feel like there's a deficiency or a lack, to reach out to people on the RTA board, like Mark, to say, listen, I'm playing this out with my wife, with my parents, with my son. And when we're analyzing and making calls, it seems to be like this is deficient. It's even more important that if you find something like that, to let people like Mark know so that we can correct it for everyone before season starts. But it's it's been a real pleasure having you on, Mark. Obviously, you and I were cool. We hang out. I went to the walk that was a really long walk. I mean, honestly, Mark, like I participated with Mark with Split Second Foundation for their Crescent City Classic, their virtual Crescent City Classic, and uh, I couldn't hang. I could only hang out. I think I did 2/3, and then my 5-year-old was like, "And I'm spent," and we were done. But Mark was banging it out. Mark was like, "I'm going this way, I'm going that way," and everybody was like, and it was just like it was so damn hot. It was just, but it was a great experience. Everyone, please check out Split Second Foundation. I had the opportunity to tour their facilities. They are top notch. I mean, I'm talking about if you are somebody who, and I love the fact it's an integrated gym, so that when you're in there, all types of people are in there. So it's like you're interacting with everybody. It's right off of Gentilly and Saint Bernard and Paris, that whole little cool area. They're right by the Kung Fu studio, which is pretty cool. So, but I mean, like, check it out. Check out Split Second Foundation. Um, During next Give NOLA Day 17, make sure they're on your list. They're always on my list. Be on it. Be on the list. But these guys do tremendous work. Mark does tremendous work. It has been such a pleasure to have you here, giving your perspective. Because I promised today, Mark, you have educated so many people to look at things a little differently when they look at what's going on with transit in the city. Because I mean, people look through that lens of this is my experience, and part of what you have to do as an educated citizen who pushes equity is to say, I need to look at everything from any perspective. And I mean, the streetcar thing, I mean, those two guys dying before it even happened, that has got to be, I mean, it's tremendous you're carrying their legacy and you're following through on it, but it's also kind of sad that we just moved so damn slow that we couldn't get it done.
Yeah, shout out to Andy Bizer, the attorney that always pushes the ADA envelope in the city of New Orleans too. And it is unfortunate, and I think we're going to continue to see that because unfortunately with most civil rights related issues, we got to fight to make change. And this is no different, right? ADA and accessibility is a civil rights issue. It's discrimination, it's inequity, and we got to change it. And then lastly, I want to make a shameless plug. Since the mayor finally has reopened the city, Split Second Foundation will be hosting our 3rd annual Dependence Day this year on August 13th, right in the hurricane season-ish mix. But it's going to be a phenomenal event. We've got Tank and the Bangers who's going to perform.
Got Tank and the Bangers?
Yeah, man.
Holy shit. I'll be there. I'll be there.
It's going to be a great party for a purpose atmosphere.
Wait. What time of day is it, Mark? What time of day is it?
7 to 11. Inside.
Oh, shit. You gonna make me get a babysitter, man. All right, that's fine. I'm going. Everybody's taking the bangers. Everybody go. Everybody go.
Yeah, taking the bangers, open bar, open food, silent auction. Everybody in the city that you know is gonna be there.
I'm gonna be there. I'm gonna be there.
Beautiful faces, great ambiance. Come get a drink. I think we're gonna put tickets on sale about mid-June. I think there'll be about $100 a ticket. All the proceeds go to Split Second Foundation and helping us propel our mission.
Okay. Well, you let me know when those tickets get on sale. Now, I only request that you let me know first so I can buy mine, and then I will blow them up for everybody else. But I want to make sure I get mine. I'm gonna buy mine first, and then I'm gonna put it out there for everybody to go buy theirs. So just let me know when they go live, and I'll tell everybody they go live 15 minutes after they go live, so I can make sure I get mine. But you got Tank and the Bangers. I will be there. I will be there. If I gotta go trick my parents and babysitting my kids, whatever I gotta do, Mark. But I mean, thank you so much for being on today. It has been my distinct pleasure to have you on here. I am sure you have changed perspectives or given people a new perspective. And I just really am humbled that you took some time out of your busy day changing lives to come hang out with me on the internet.
Hey man, anytime. I really appreciate you having me on. And anytime you want to continue to have this dialogue, I think there's more issues we can talk
We got a lot more to talk about, but let's give everybody some time to digest this conversation because you dropped a whole lot of knowledge on people. But the conversation about ADA compliance and ADA accessibility is an ongoing one, and we're always finding new things that have to be corrected. So we have plenty to talk about, and we'll be talking about this again. I might even do it I might even do it again closer to your event just to help us push it. Although honestly, taking the bangers, you ain't got to push it that hard. It's going you're not gonna have any trouble selling tickets, man.
It's gonna do its own thing.
All right, Mark. Thank you so much. You have a great weekend.
All right, JP. Thank you.